So yeah, fasting can bring you lots of health benefits. But what really matters if you want to sustain these benefits is your diet after breaking the fast. And the fast is, of course, a great tool to jumpstart into a healthier diet and lifestyle. But the food choices you make are a very personal matter, which, besides your health, also involves things like taste, culture, pleasure. Your social life tends to evolve around food, and food is also has lots of environmental factors associated with it. And there is nowadays lots of contradicting information available on diet, with the internet pretty much being an endless source of dietary advice. And what we see in the media, they like sensational headlines, which are often only partly true or sometimes even downright false. Because when you really take a closer look at the preponderance of all the evidence, you actually find out that we pretty much know what a healthy diet consists of. We know that adding more vegetables and fruit to your diet will be beneficial for your health. And we can also say for sure that people who eat the standard Western diet, which is high in saturated fat, cholesterol, and high in refined sugar and other processed foods, we know that people on the Western diet suffer substantially higher rates of cancer, cardiovascular disease, diabetes, and all the other Western chronic diseases if we compare them to people eating any kind of traditional diet. And we had the American journalist Michael Pollan. He summed up a healthy diet in 7 words, which were eat food, not too much, mostly plants. And that's pretty much the shortest as we can say what a healthy diet is. Because we know that the healthiest diet is a whole food, plant-based diet, which is low in added sugars, oils, and salt. Because this is the only diet that has shown to halt and even reverse cardiovascular disease and many other of the other chronic diseases. But you can see your diet as on a spectrum with on one side this healthiest diet, and on the other side a diet that's high in saturated fat, refined food, salt, sugar, and oils. And how strict you have to follow the diet really depends also on the state of your health. Because when you are generally healthy and you don't suffer from any ailments, your body is well able to handle some animal food, some refined foods. But when you're trying to overcome a disease, it's often necessary to follow the diet a bit more stricter. And then many discussions nowadays on diet, they evolve around the macronutrients in our diet. We have, for example, the low carb diet, which is often heard nowadays. But there are 3 macronutrients in our diet, which are fat, protein, and carbohydrates. Explain a bit more about fat. And as Michael Pollan said, not eating too much pretty much implies not eating too much fat. Because fats are very high in calories and they don't add any bulk to your diet. As fats and oils are the most calorie dense foods we can eat. They contain 9 calories per gram, which means that 1 tablespoon of oil already contains around 130 calories, and it won't fill up your stomach. And if we compare them to starches, which only contribute about 1 calorie per gram, and this happens because these starches, they come in a package with dietary fiber and water, which both don't contribute any calories. And another problem with oils and fat in your diet is that they are very easily added to your body fat. Because what happens after a meal, these tiny fat particles, they enter the bloodstream, and with very minor changes, they can actually be stored in your fat cells. And then another problem that occurs with lots of fat in your diet is that it can actually slow down your metabolism, which then again would lead to weight gain. And this occurs because tiny fat particles that get stuck in your cells, which we call intramyocellular lipids, they impair the working of the mitochondria, the cellular energy burners. And what also happens, because fat comes into the cell through passive diffusion, so there's nothing necessary. It can just cross the barrier into the cell. And if we compare that to glucose, because glucose needs an active transport, which is facilitated by insulin. So when you eat something with sugar, insulin is released, and then your cells, the insulin reaches your cells, and insulin pretty much works as a key, because it goes in and there's a cascade of reactions which then allows the glucose to enter the cell. And what happens if we have too much of these fat droplets in our cell? They impair the working of this chain of reactions, and that would lead to insulin resistance, because the insulin will still reach your cells, but the glucose won't be able to enter your cell. And this causes a rise in your blood sugars, and it leads to insulin resistance, which in the end can lead to type 2 diabetes and all the other chronic diseases. And then we have protein in our diet. And the dietary requirements for protein are actually very low, because only 5% of your calories from protein can already be sufficient. But generally, around 10% of your calories in protein is recommended. Because if we look, for example, at human breast milk, which is designed as the food in the prime stage of our growth, and it only contains up to 5% of protein. So when you look at a diet, it actually becomes impossible to design a diet that contains insufficient protein. As long as you're consuming enough calories, you will always get enough protein. Because if we look at a potato, for example, a potato already has around 10% of its calories from protein. So what is a protein? A protein, they are built out of long chains of different amino acids. And one protein can contain up to 300 up to 1,000 different amino acids. And we have 20 different amino acids on the planet, and they kind of work like the letters of the alphabet. Because with these 20 amino acids, we can produce all the protein that's present. And 12 of these amino acids our body can produce itself, and the other 8 we must get from our diet. And these are the so-called essential amino acids. And it was often said that plant proteins are incomplete, which is not true, as all protein actually originates from plants. And most foods contain a mixture of all of these essential amino acids. What can be there can be a limiting amino acid in certain plant foods, but this is no problem as long as you eat enough calories and you're eating a healthy combination of foods. And we also know that excess protein in your diet will take its toll on the body, and it's estimated that on average people on a Western diet tend to lose around 25% of their overall kidney function over a lifespan of 70 years, which is then eating a diet that's high in animal protein. This animal protein is rich in the sulfur containing amino acids, which are, sulfur is the most acidic element we can digest. And what happens when we have too much of these sulfur containing amino acids, the body has to use calcium phosphate to neutralize this acid load in the body. And the biggest store of calcium phosphate in our body is in our bones. And we see that in the long term, this can also lead to degeneration of the bones, to osteoporosis. And then we have carbohydrates, which are the biggest food group, and they encompass everything from broccoli up to sugar candy. And we can divide the carbohydrates up into starches, into cellulose, and the simple sugars, or the refined carbohydrates. And what starches are long chains of these glucose, the simple sugar molecules. And our body has the ability to break down the linkages down, and this happens it takes time to break down these linkages. And then these simple sugars are used as an energy source in the body. And also these starches, they are too big to enter our taste buds on our tongue, and that's also the reason why starches don't give you any sweet taste in your mouth. But a meal that's high in starches will give us a prolonged feeling of satiety, because it satisfies the appetite, and it provides us with energy over a prolonged period as your body takes time to break these starches down. And then we have cellulose, which has a very similar structure as these starches. But the only difference is that our body is not able to break down the linkages between these individual sugar molecules. So these cellulose passes undigested through our small intestine, and then becomes the food source for the healthy bacteria living in the large intestine. This cellulose is the dietary fiber that we have in our diet. And then we have the simple sugars or the refined carbohydrates, which are pretty much, they become a source of calories, but they don't have any nutritional value. And because they are already broken down into small parts, they are very fast absorbed when you eat them, and they will lead to a spike in your blood sugar, which then also would lead again to a dip afterwards and would make you feel hungry again. And when we consume too much of these simple sugars, it will lead to nutritional imbalances, as it implies we are getting less calories from the nutrient-rich foods. And then an excess of starches in your diet are, under any normal circumstances, they are not turned into body fat. Because the body actually prefers to burn off these extra calories from carbohydrates as body heat, rather than to turning it into body fat. Because this process of transforming carbohydrates into fat, it's called the de novo lipogenesis. And this process is used by farm animals like pigs and cows to make them grow fast. But humans are very inefficient in converting carbohydrates into fat. And it only happens under exceptional circumstances, and then in this process around 30% of the calories are already burned off just in this process. And it only happens under extreme conditions. But looking at all these macronutrients in our diet, you could say that a healthy diet would consist of around 80% carbohydrate, 10% protein, 10% fat, with lots of debate on the exact numbers. But in the end, people eat foods and we don't eat any nutrients. And a whole foods plant-based diet will naturally provide you with everything that you need, with the only exception being vitamin B12, which is then recommended to supplement. Because all these unrefined starches, the fruits and vegetables, they're all perfectly made by natural design to meet our protein needs, as long as we eat enough of them calorie-wise. And also the carbohydrates are the best sources of vitamins, minerals, and phytochemicals that we can have in our diet. So this whole food plant-based diet is so beneficial for your health because of its high nutrient value. It contains lots of dietary fiber, it has a high antioxidant value, and is naturally low in proteins and fat. And another reason why it is so beneficial to have lots of plant foods is that that it pretty much implies that you leave out more of the bad stuff, more of the processed foods, and more of the animal foods.